I've buried friends. I've shot horses I raised from foals because their legs gave out and there was nothing kinder left to do. I've watched a drought turn good men into thieves and good women into ghosts. I thought, by the age of 51, that there was nothing a person could carry that I hadn't already seen the weight of in somebody else's shoulders. I was wrong, because I never met a man who carried what he carried and smiled about it. Smiled like it was nothing. Smiled like the secret pressing down on his whole life was a stone in his boot he just learned to walk around. This is the story of the poorest man I ever met, and the richest. They were the same man, and what he kept hidden beyond that black line of forest changed the way I understand the word enough for the rest of my days. Stay with me, it starts ugly, it always does. The first time I saw Elias Tohono, he was on his knees in the mud trying to lift a dead mule, and he was losing. It was the spring of my 42nd year, and the rain had been coming down for 3 days straight. The cold, mean kind that doesn't fall so much as it leans on you. I'd ridden up the high trail above the Verd Valley to count the strays that always drifted off when the weather turned, and I came around a stand of dripping pines, and there he was. An old man, soaked to the bone, both arms hooked under the belly of an animal that had clearly given up the ghost hours before, heaving like he believed that if he just pulled hard enough the thing would stand back up and walk. I want to be honest with you about my first thought, because I'm not proud of it and I think you've earned the truth. My first thought was, vagrant. His coat was 3 coats, really, layered and stitched and restitched until the original was lost somewhere underneath. His boots were wrapped in rawhide where the soles had let go. He had a face like a dry riverbed, all cracks and old courses, and a long gray braid going dark with rainwater down his spine. Everything about him said pour the way a bell says noon, loud, plain, impossible to mistake. I almost rode on. God forgive me, I almost rode on. I had a herd to count and a fire waiting at home and a wife who'd be cross if I came back after dark again. And men like that, men who looked like that, well, you learn not to get tangled. That was the wisdom of the country. Keep moving. Mind your own. But the mule shifted in the mud and the old man went down with it, face first into the muck, and he didn't curse. That's what stopped me. Any man I'd ever known would have cursed, would have kicked the dead animal and damned the rain and the mountain and his own bad luck. This one just pushed himself up on his hands, wiped the mud from his eyes with the back of one wrist, and looked at the mule the way you'd look at a friend who died in their sleep. Sad, tender, not angry at all. I'd ridden maybe 40 paces past him before I understood. I'd already turned my horse around. I should tell you something about myself, since I'll be the one walking you through this, and you ought to know whose eyes you're borrowing. My name is Walt Caro. I ran cattle on a stretch of mid-elevation grass that nobody else wanted because the water was unreliable and the winters bit hard. I'm not a sentimental man. I keep a logbook, have kept one since I was 19, and in it I write the date and the weather and how many head and what broke and what got fixed. My wife Ruth used to tease me that I'd write down my own funeral, clear skis, buried Walt, fence still down by the creek. She wasn't wrong about my nature. I trust numbers. I distrust feelings, mostly because the men I grew up around used feelings as an excuse to do stupid things, and I'd resolved early not to be one of them. So understand that when I tell you I turned my horse around for a stranger in the rain, that was already a strange thing for me. I didn't have a word for what made me do it. I still don't. The closest I can get is that the way he looked at that mule made me ashamed of how I'd looked at him. You'll not move it that way, I called down, swinging off my horse. Ground's too soft. You'll just dig yourself a grave alongside it. He looked up at me. And here is the first thing about Elias Tohono that I could not explain to you if I talked all night. He was not surprised to see me. Not relieved, not wary, not anything a normal man is when help walks out of a storm. He looked at me like I was expected, like he'd known I was coming and I was only a little late. She was a good one, he said. His voice was low and even with the careful rhythm of a man who'd learned the language second but learned it well. 21 years. She carried more than her share, every one of them. He patted the dead mule's flank. I should let her rest, but the trail behind washes out by morning, and if she stays here, she'll go down the mountain in the flood. I wanted to put her under the pines, dry ground. A small, exhausted smile. Foolish, I know. It wasn't foolish. That was the thing. I'd known men who'd weep over a dead dog and the same men who'd let a cousin starve. Grief is no proof of goodness. But there was something in the steady, unhurried care of it, the wanting to give a dead animal a dry place, that I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting in an old letter. "I've a rope and a horse," I said. "We'll drag her to the pines. Then you'll come to my fire before you freeze to death and make a liar of whoever loves you." He studied me a moment. Then he laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh, like the idea that someone might love him was the funniest thing he'd heard in years. "There's a fire closer," he said. "Mine up beyond the trees." He nodded at the black wall of forest above us, where the mountain steepened and the pines grew so thick the rain barely got through. "You helped me. You'll take my coffee, that's the way of it." The way of it. He said that a lot, I'd come to learn. As though the world ran on obligations most people had simply forgotten the existence of. We dragged the mule to the pines. It took both horses and the better part of an hour, and by the end my hands were raw through my gloves and the light was going gray-green and strange the way it does in mountain dusk. He covered her with pine boughs, working slow, arranging them like he was tucking in a child, and when he was done he stood over her and said something low in a language that wasn't Spanish and wasn't English, and I understood not one word of it, and I understood all of it. "Apache," he said, catching my look. "My mother's, I don't speak it well anymore. There's no one left to speak it to." He said this without bitterness, the way he said everything as though it were just weather. "My father was a Mexican silver man. Tohono is his. The first name they gave me at the mission. I am, you could say, a man assembled from leftovers." Another of those small smiles. But the parts work. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which is a skill I've spent 50 years perfecting. We rode up through the trees and the dark came down complete, and I confess I felt the first crawl of unease, that old country wisdom whispering, "You don't know this man, you don't know this trail, you're a long way from your own fire and your own gun is wet." But the unease had no roots. There was nothing in him that frightened me. If anything, I felt, and I struggled to admit this even in my logbook later, safe. Safer than I'd felt in a long time. As though I'd been carrying something heavy myself, for years, without nomming it, and walking behind this old poor man in the dark, I could feel it loosening at the straps. Then we came out of the trees, and I saw where he lived, and my heart went down into my boots. It was a hut. There's no kinder word, and he wouldn't have wanted one. A single room of stacked stone and mud chinking, a roof of sod and bark gone soft with age, a doorway you'd have to stoop through. A pen out back with 2 goats and a linta where the dead mule should have stood. No window, no floor but earth. A single iron pot, a single tin cup. And when he saw me notice there was only 1 cup, he just took it down and filled it and handed it to me first, and drank his own coffee straight from the pot. I have been poor. There were winters on my own place when Ruth and I ate beans till we couldn't look at a bean without flinching. But I had never in my whole life seen poverty like this worn so lightly. The man owned, as far as I could tell, that pot, that cup, the clothes he stood in, a knife, a worn blanket, and the goats. 21 years he'd had that mule, and she was the richest thing he'd ever owned, and now she was under the pines. And he was content. That was the splinter I couldn't get out, all evening. Drinking his bitter coffee in that smoke-dark room while the rain hammered the sod roof, I kept turning it over. Men who have nothing are angry. That's the rule. I'd seen it 100 times, the gnawing, the grasping, the way want hollows a person out and fills them back up with spite. But Elias Tohono had less than any man I'd ever met, and he sat there across the fire telling me about the way the light came through the pines in October, the particular green of the moss after rain, the names of birds, and his face was the face of a man who had everything he wanted. I thought he was simple. Forgive me again, I did. I thought maybe his mind had gone soft with age and solitude, that he'd lost the part of a man that knows to want more. It's a comfortable thing to think about a poor man. It lets you keep your own getting and grasping and call it sense. I was wrong about that too. Because near the end of the night, when the fire was low and the coffee was gone, and I was thinking of how I'd never make it home in this dark and would have to sleep on his floor, he said something that stuck a hook in me that's never come out. He said, "You keep looking at my pot and my cup, and you're thinking this poor old man." I started to deny it. He waved it off gentle. "It's all right, everyone thinks it. The mission men when they come, the hunters, the young one from the valley who brings me salt." He poked the fire. The embers shifted and threw red light up the cracks of his face. "I let them, it's easier. A poor man is invisible, and there are things I have that I'd rather stay invisible." He looked at me then, and for the first time all night there was something else in his eyes, not fear exactly, but the carefulness of a man standing at the edge of a long drop. "You helped me bury my mule, so I'll tell you this much and no more tonight. I am not poor Walt Caro. I am the wealthiest man on this mountain, and what I'm wealthy in is waiting on the far side of these trees in a place I show to no one." He set down the poker. "Sleep. Tomorrow, if the rain stops, I'll decide whether you're a man I show it to." I want to tell you I slept easy after that. I didn't. I lay on his earth floor under a borrowed blanket that smelled of wood smoke and goat and something green and old, and I listened to the rain ease off the roof toward midnight, and I stared up at the dark where the bark roof was, and I could not stop my mind from running. What does a man like that hide? Out here a secret means one of three things, and I'd lived long enough to know all three. It means silver, a vein, a cache, a strongbox dragged off some old Spanish trail. It means crime, a thing buried that ought not be found. Or it means a person, someone hidden, someone hunted, someone loved. I lay there and I'm ashamed to say I thought about the silver first. His father a silver man. I'm the wealthiest man on this mountain. The mind goes where greed has dug it grooves, and mine had grooves like anyone's. I thought about a vein of silver beyond the forest and a poor old half-Apache man sitting on a fortune, content to drink bitter coffee from an iron pot while he aged into the ground. It would explain the contentment, wouldn't it? Knowing what he had, not needing to spend it to feel it. But then I'd remember his face over the mule, the boughs arranged like a blanket, the word in a language with no one left to hear it. And the silver theory would crumble, because no man who loved a mule that much was sitting easy on a fortune he wouldn't use to buy himself a roof that didn't leak. So crime then, a body, a thing done long ago. The country was full of men with pasts they'd ridden 1,000 miles to outrun. He had the look of a man who'd seen the worst the world could do. I'd seen that look in the mirror. Or a person, and something in me, the same nameless thing that had turned my horse around, knew before my reason caught up that it was the third. That whatever waited beyond those trees, it was alive, and it was loved, and the lightness he wore his poverty with was not the lightness of a man who has nothing. It was the lightness of a man who has something so precious that everything else, the pot, the cup, the leaking roof, the dead mule, his own comfort, his own name, had simply stopped mattering by comparison. I fell asleep on that thought, and I dreamed, strangely, of my own daughter, who we lost to fever the winter she turned 6, and whom I had not let myself dream of in 11 years. I woke with my face wet and the old man already up, and the rain stopped, and gray morning light coming under the door. He was outside, sitting on a stone, watching the valley fill with mist below us. He didn't turn when I came out. He'd left the tin cup, full and steaming, on the stone beside him for me. He drank from the pot. "You cried in the night," he said, "not unkindly, just a fact like the weather." "I had a dream." He sipped. "This is a place for dreams, the ones you've been hiding from. The mountain brings them up out of you, like water out of a spring." He glanced at me sidelong. Who was it? I have never in my life answered a question like that from a man I'd known one night. I don't know why I answered it then. The mist, maybe. The coffee. The strange permission of a place where a poor man had cried over a mule and not been ashamed. My daughter, I said. Leela, she'd be 17 now, she isn't anything now, hasn't been for 11 years. He nodded slowly. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say any of the things people say, the things that are really about making the sorry person feel less awkward in the face of your grief. He just nodded, like I'd told him true north was that way, and the world rearranged a little to account for the new fact of it. Then he stood with a grunt and a hand on his bad knee, and he looked at me a long moment, and I felt myself being weighed. "All right," he said. "Come on then, I've decided." Decided what? He was already walking, into the trees, away from the valley, toward the dark high side of the mountain where the forest grew thickest, and I'd assumed there was nothing but more mountain. "You buried my mule with me," he called back, not turning, "and you dreamed your dead child under my roof. A man doesn't do those two things in one night and stay a stranger, so I'll show you." He stopped at the tree line and finally looked back at me, and his old riverbed face was doing something I hadn't seen it do. It was frightened. Not of me. Of what he was about to do. Of the weight of letting another living soul see the thing he'd carried alone for so long that the carrying had become who he was. "I'll show you what's beyond the forest," he said. "And then, Walt Caro, you'll understand why I drink my coffee from a pot and call myself the richest man on the mountain. And you'll have a choice to make. A hard one. The same one I've been making, alone, every single day for 19 years. The forest beyond his hut was not a forest you walked through. It was one you were swallowed by. The pines stood so close their trunks touched, and the floor was a foot deep in red needles that gave underfoot like flesh. And within 30 paces the morning light was gone, not dimmed, gone, replaced by a green underwater dusk where the only sound was our own breathing and the far-off complaint of a single jay. Elias moved through it without a trail. There was no trail. I understood that he wanted it that way. A trail is a thing that can be found and followed. He kept us to the bare stone where it broke through the needles, stepping rock to rock, leaving nothing. And I, clumsy in my heavy boots, did my best to do the same and mostly failed. 19 years, he said over his shoulder, and the only feet that have crossed this ground are mine and the deer's. Now yours, step where I step. I stepped where he stepped. We climbed. The mountain folded back on itself in a way you couldn't have guessed from below, the slope rising and then, strangely, falling, the pines thinning, and a sound began to reach me that I couldn't place at first because it was so out of keeping with everything. Water. Not the rush of a flooded creek, but the steady, generous voice of a real spring, a lot of it falling somewhere ahead. And then the trees opened and I stopped, and I forgot to breathe. It was a valley. A small one, maybe a half-mile across, cupped in the mountain's hand and hidden so completely that a man could have ridden the ridges above it his whole life and never known it was there. A spring came down the far wall in a white thread and pooled and ran green through the bottom. And the bottom was grass, real grass, deep and wet and impossibly green after the gray, drowned world we'd left behind. And there were trees that weren't pines, cottonwoods, and a stand of something with white blossoms, and there were small fields. Tended fields, corn, beans, squash, the three of them growing up together the old way. Smoke rose from somewhere. And animals, goats, a few sheep, a pair of horses cropping the grass with the loose ease of creatures that had never in their lives been afraid. I had ridden out of a famine. The valley below was dying of drought, and the high country was drowning in cold rain. And here, hidden behind the swallowing forest, was a green and gentle world that looked like the country must have looked before any of us came to wreck it. "My God," I said. "His maybe," Elias said, "or hers, the mountains, I only keep it." He had stopped beside me and he wasn't looking at the valley. He was looking at me, watching my face the way a father watches a stranger meet his child for the first time, braced, hopeful, ready to hate me if I flinched. "Come down slow. They'll be afraid of you. Let them be afraid, don't reach for anyone. They. So it was the third thing after all. A person, people. We came down into the green, and I saw the first of them, a woman, old as Elias or older, kneeling at the edge of a field with a digging stick, who saw us and went still as a struck deer, and then was simply gone, vanished into the corn without a sound, and I felt the whole valley change around me the way a pond changes when a shadow crosses it. Word moved ahead of us though no one spoke. By the time we reached the cluster of low brush and mud houses at the valley's heart, they were waiting, not hiding now, because Elias was with me, but waiting, gathered, watching. There were 11 of them. I counted the way I count everything. 11. 4 were old, 2 women, 2 men, faces older than the mountain, eyes that had seen something I could not look at directly. 3 were grown, a man and 2 women in their middle years, and 4 were young. 2 boys, maybe 8 and 10, who stared at me with naked terror and a wonder they couldn't help. A girl of perhaps 4, hidden in an old woman's skirts, one eye showing. And a girl, a young woman, really, of about 17, who did not hide and did not run and stood at the front of them all with her chin up and her hands fisted at her sides, looking at me like she'd been preparing her whole life to look at exactly this, the first outsider's face she had ever seen, and had decided in advance that she would not let it frighten her. 17. Leela's age. The thought went through me like cold water, and I had to look away from her and study my own boots until I could trust my face again. Elias spoke to them, low and long, in the Apache I'd heard him use over the mule, except it wasn't dead in his mouth here. Here it ran. Here there were people to catch it. The old ones answered, and the young woman answered, sharp, and there was an argument, brief and fierce, and I understood not a word of it, but I understood the shape of it perfectly. It was the oldest argument in the world. He had brought a stranger home, and they were asking him what in the name of all that was holy he thought he was doing. He let them finish. Then he turned to me and told it plain, and I'll give it to you the way he gave it to me, standing in the wet grass with 11 of the last people of his mother's band looking on, because there's no improving on the truth. My mother's people, he said, what's left of them? 19 years ago there were 60. There was a place to the south where they lived, a poor place, but theirs, and they were promised they could keep it. You know how those promises went. He said it without heat. The heat had gone out of it long ago, leaving only the fact polished smooth. The soldiers came in the early morning. I was away. I was a grown man by then, off doing my father's silver work, ashamed of my mother's people, if you want the truth of it, ashamed and absent and saving my own skin. When I came back there was nothing but ash and the ones who'd run. These ones. They came up into the mountains because the mountains were the only place no one wanted. I found them here, half-starved in this valley, hiding, and I had a choice. He paused. The young woman was watching him tell it. I had the sense she had heard it many times and that hearing it never got easier. I could have gone to the agency, told them there were survivors. The law by then said the survivors should be brought in, counted, put on the reservation in the south. For their own good. The agency man was not a cruel man, you understand. He'd have done it gently. They'd have walked them down out of these mountains and counted them and given them blankets and bad flour and a square of dust to live on. And the children would have gone to the mission school where they'd have their hair cut and their language beaten out of them and their names taken away and given back in English. He looked at me. Or, I could tell no one, keep them here. Feed them, hide them, carry their salt up the mountain on a mule and let them stay what they are, free, hidden, dwindling. His voice did not break, but it bent, just slightly, like a green branch under snow. I chose the second. Every day for 19 years I have chosen the second, and every day for 19 years I have wondered if I chose right, or if I have only kept them in a beautiful cage because I could not bear to be the man who handed his mother's people to the people who burned her. I have turned that speech over more times than I can count in the years since. I have decided he was right, and I have decided he was wrong, and I have decided that right and wrong are words too small to fit around a thing like that. The way a child's coat won't fit around a grown man's grief. But standing there that morning, I didn't think any of that. I just looked at the 11 of them and the green valley and the corn growing up the old way, and I understood the pot and the tin cup at last. He gave everything down here. Everything. His mule had carried their salt. His leaking roof and his single cup and his bitter coffee were the price of this, of corn and goats, and a spring that didn't fail, and 11 people who could speak their own names to each other in their own tongue. He was the wealthiest man on the mountain because he had spent himself down to nothing buying the only thing he wanted, which was for these 11 to go on being themselves a little longer in a world that wanted them gone. I am not a man who cries. I told you that. I'd cried twice in 11 years and both times in the last 2 days, and I felt the third coming and I clamped down on it hard, because I had the sense that the young woman with her chin up would have despised my tears, and I found I cared what she thought. "Why show me?" I asked. My voice came out rough. "You hid them 19 years. You said yourself a poor man's invisible, that you want to be invisible. Why break that for a stranger who will be back over the ridge by nightfall?" And here is where the floor dropped out from under everything I thought this story was. Elias didn't answer. He looked at the young woman, and the young woman, who had not taken her eyes off me since I'd walked out of the trees, finally spoke in English. Careful, accented, plainly learned in secret from Elias across 19 years of winter nights, but clear. "Because we are dying," she said, "and he is too proud to say it, so I will." She stepped forward past Elias, and the old ones made a small sound of fear, and she ignored them. There were 60. Now there are 11. The old ones die and no new ones come because, and here for the first time her chin trembled just once before she said it again, because there is no one. There are the boys and the little one and me. And the boys are children. We do not marry our own brothers and sisters. So when the old ones are gone, there will be the 4 of us, alone in a valley, and then 3, and then 2, and then 1, and then this place will be exactly what the soldiers wanted it to be 19 years ago. Empty. She was not crying now. She had moved through crying into something harder and steadier on the far side of it. He chose to hide us so we could stay free, but free and dying is still dying. I have told him this. Every year I tell him. And every year he says, "Not yet, not yet, the world out there will take you and break you." And he is not wrong, but he is not right either. She was close enough now that I could see she had a scar through one eyebrow and a way of standing with her weight forward, like she was always half a second from running or fighting. She looked at me, Walt Caro, rancher, stranger, a man who'd nearly ridden past her grandfather in the rain, and she said the thing that I have never escaped. "He brought you because the little one is sick," she said. "Sick in a way our medicine cannot reach. She has been burning for 4 days. And to save her we need things from your world, and the moment we take things from your world will know we are here. So that is the choice he has been too proud to put in your mouth. You can ride back over that ridge and forget you saw us, and we will lose her and stay hidden and go on dying slow and free. Or you can help us and save her, and by saving her, and the only safety we have ever had." Her dark eyes did not waver. "He has carried that choice alone for 19 years. Now it is yours too. So choose, rancher, but choose knowing that whatever you do, someone we love pays for it. I want to tell you I knew right away. I want to tell you that the good man I'd like to believe I am stepped forward without hesitation. But you've trusted me this far with the truth, and I won't lie to you now. I hesitated. Because she'd laid it out clean, and it was a trap with no clean way out, the kind of choice that doesn't have a right answer, only a least strong one, and even that you can't see until years later when it's too late to choose again. Save the child and you light a signal fire that brings the agency, the soldiers, the mission school, the cut hair and the taken names, the very destruction Elias had spent his whole life and his every possession holding back. Or keep the secret, keep the safety, and let a 4-year-old burn to death in a hidden valley so that the others could go on hiding a little longer. And under it all, the thing I could barely look at, the little girl in the old woman's skirts had 2 dark eyes now, both showing, watching me. And the young woman was 17. And somewhere 11 years back was a fever I had not been able to do one single thing about. A small body going hot and then cold under my useless hands, and a hole in the ground I had dug myself because I could not stand to let another man dig it. I had not been able to save Leela. I looked at the little girl burning in the skirts, and I understood that the mountain had not brought my daughter up out of me in a dream by accident. It had been getting me ready. For this. For a fever and a choice and a chance. The chance I never had to do the one thing for someone else's child that I had failed to do for my own. Elias was watching me. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd seen me cry in the night and asked me who, and I'd told him, and that was why, that was the whole reason he'd decided, looking at me over a tin cup of morning coffee, that I was the man he'd break his 19-year silence for. Not because I'd buried his mule. Because I'd buried my daughter. Because a man who has lost a child to a fever and a useless pair of hands is a man who, when shown another child burning, cannot ride over the ridge. He had not chosen a kind man. He'd chosen a haunted one. He'd chosen the one man on the mountain who literally could not say no. You knew, I said to him. It came out as an accusation and I let it. Last night, you already knew you'd show me. You let me lie there guessing about silver. I knew, he agreed, with no apology in it at all. I am not above using a man's grief, Walt Caro, when 11 lives sit on the scale. I have done worse than that to keep them breathing. I will answer for all of it someday, but not today. He looked for just a moment, unbearably tired, the tiredness of a man who has been carrying 11 people up a mountain on his back for 19 years and has only just now, this morning, let one corner of the weight rest on someone else's shoulder and discovered how much it had been crushing him. The child is burning. The arguing is done. What will you do? The little girl coughed, a wet, terrible, rattling sound that no 4-year-old should make. The exact sound that I had heard in my own house 11 winters back, and had sworn I'd never hear again. And something in me that had been clenched shut for 11 years came open all at once. I knelt down in the wet grass, slow, the way you approach a frightened animal, and I held out one hand toward the little girl, not to take her, just to be still and open and unafraid in front of her. And I heard Elias behind me make a small sound, and I think it was relief and I think it was grief, and I think, knowing him now, that it was both at once because they always were with him. I've a wagon, I said. My voice was steady. I don't know how. And a wife with more healing in her hands than any agency doctor. And a cellar dug into a north hill where a man could hide 11 head of anything for as long as he needed to, and no one the wiser. I was already counting, already planning, already doing the only thing I have ever known how to do, which is to take an impossible thing and break it into small possible pieces and start. Will not ride over that ridge and forget you. And will not light a fire that brings them down on you either. There's a third way. There's always a third way. It's just always the hardest, and it's always the one that costs the man who picks it. I looked back at Elias, and then at the young woman with the scar and the steady eyes, and I made the choice. The hard one. The same one he'd been making alone every day for 19 years, except now it was mine too, and I have never once regretted it, and I have never once stopped paying for it. Get the child, I said, and pack what the old ones can't be parted from. We move tonight in the dark before the rain comes back to wash out the low trail. I stood up out of the grass with my knees cracking and my heart going like a hammer, and 11 of the last people of a murdered band looking at me, the stranger, the rancher, deciding in real time whether to believe me. You're all coming down off this mountain, I said, not to the agency, to me. The young woman stared at me, and then she did the thing that broke me clean in half, finally, after 11 years and 2 days. She turned to the burning little girl, and she said something soft in Apache, and she pointed at me, and the only word I caught was one Elias had taught me by the fire the night before without my noticing he was teaching me anything at all. The word for help. Or maybe it was the word for friend. In their tongue, Elias had told me, they were nearly the same. You could not be one without becoming the other. I never did learn which one she said. We came down off the mountain in the dark, in the rain, with a dying child wrapped against my chest, and 11 lives strung out behind me on a trail I could barely see. I'd ridden home alone first, that afternoon, hard, pushed my horse till his sides heaved, and told Ruth. Just told her. Stood dripping in our doorway and told her there were 11 people hidden on the mountain, and one of them a little girl burning with fever, and that I'd promised them our cellar and her hands and our silence, and that if she said no, I would understand it, because what I was asking could cost us everything we'd built. Ruth is a small woman. She came up to my collarbone on her best day. She listened to the whole thing with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and when I was done she said only, "How many blankets do we have, and is it enough?" Not a question, a beginning. I have loved that woman for 30 years, and I have never loved her like I loved her in that moment, turning already to the linen chest, counting under her breath, the way I count. The way the people I love and I have always counted our way through the things too big to feel all at once. So that was settled. And in the last gray of the day, I rode back up with the wagon as far as the wagon would go, which was the washed-out low trail above the valley, and there Elias met me with the others, and we began to bring them down on foot through the dark to where the wagon waited. You have not known fear until you have moved frightened people through a forest at night who have not left that forest in 19 years. The old ones could barely walk. We half carried them. One of the old men, the eldest, a man so ancient he seemed made of the same gray wood as the dead pines, kept stopping and turning back toward the valley, and each time the young woman would go to him and speak low and take his hand and turn him gently down the mountain again, and each time it cost her something, I could see it, because she was turning her own grandfather away from the only home he'd ever survive in, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. That is the thing about the hard choices. You don't make them once. You make them over and over, every 50 paces, all the way down the mountain, until your legs give out and you make them on your knees. The boys carried what they could. The little girl burned against my chest, light as a bird, her breath rattling, and twice on that descent she went so still I stopped breathing myself until I felt the small hot flutter of her start again. And Elias brought up the rear, and Elias was failing. I didn't see it at first. He'd always moved through that country like he was part of it, but somewhere on the descent the 19 years caught up with him all at once, the way they do with old men who have been holding a great weight off the ground by main force and finally, let someone else take an edge of it. His body had been waiting, I think, waiting for permission to be tired. And the moment he believed, really believed, that the 11 might make it down without him carrying every ounce, his old heart started to set the burden down, and a body that has been a beast of burden for 19 years does not always know how to stop being one. It just stops. He fell on the lower switchbacks. Quiet. No cry. The young woman was at his side before I'd even turned, and the rain was coming hard again now, and the wagon was close. I could hear the horses below, and I knelt over him in the mud with the burning child still strapped to my chest, and I thought, with a despair I have no words for, I am going to lose 2 of them in one night, the smallest and the strongest, and I will have brought them down off their mountain only to bury them in mine. His eyes were open. He looked up at me through the rain, and his old riverbed face was doing the thing I'd seen it do only once. At the tree line it was frightened, but not for himself. He grabbed my wrist with a grip that had no business being so strong, and he pulled me down close, and over the rain he said, "Get her down to your wife, the child now, don't wait for me. I'm an old man at the end of a long carrying, and I do not matter, she matters." His eyes cut to the young woman, then to the boys, then back to me, fierce. "All of them matter, I never did, I was only ever the mule." A terrible smile. "Carry them, Walt Caro, the way I carried them, the way that mule carried me. You take an edge and you don't put it down till someone else's hands are under it. That's the way of it. That's the only way of it, go." I went. I am not proud of how fast I went. But he was right, and the child was dying, and the cruelest mercy of that night was that he gave me no choice. He ordered me down the mountain away from him, toward the living child with the same authority he'd used to keep 11 people alive in a hidden valley for 19 years. And I obeyed him the way you obey a man who has earned, with his whole spent life, the right to be obeyed. The young woman stayed with him. I heard her voice behind me as I went down, low and steady and Apache, the language with no one left to speak it. Except there were people left, 11 of them, 12 if you counted the stubborn rancher learning his first words of it. And that was the whole point. That was everything he'd bought with his life. And she knelt in the mud and spoke it to him so that the last sounds in his ears would be his mother's tongue and not the rain. The fever broke at dawn. I want to give you that plainly, because Elias never got it given to him plainly, and it's the least I can do for the telling. Ruth worked over that child all night in our cellar by lamplight, cool cloths, and a tea of something she'd learned from her own grandmother, and a steadiness that never once cracked, and somewhere in the gray hour before sunrise the little girl's burning broke and ran out of her in a flood of sweat, and she opened her eyes, and she looked up at this strange, pale woman bent over her, and she did not scream. She just looked. And Ruth, who had buried our Leela with me 11 years before and had not let herself hold a feverish child since, made a sound I had never heard her make, and pressed her forehead to that small, wet brow, and stayed like that a long time. The child lived. Her name, I learned later, meant something like seed that waits under snow. The old ones had named her in the valley 4 years before, in hope, in defiance, in the teeth of everything, a name that meant we are not finished. Something of us is still waiting to grow. They could not have known how right they'd be. She lived, and the eldest old man lived, and the others, all of them but one. Elias Tohono died on the mountain that night, on the lower switchbacks in the rain, with his granddaughter's voice in his ear, having spent every last thing he owned, his mule, his roof, his name, his comfort, his pride, and finally his worn-out heart, on the single proposition that 11 people the world had tried to erase deserved to go on being themselves a little longer. We brought his body down at first light and buried him on the north hill above the cellar, under a cottonwood, where the young woman said he could see the high country he'd spent his life inside. I dug the grave myself. I would not let the boys do it. I had dug one too small grave 11 years before with these same hands and sworn I'd never dig another. And here I was breaking the oath for a man I'd known 3 days. And I want to tell you it felt like grief, but the truth is it felt like gratitude, like the only thing I had big enough to give him. My own 2 hands in the cold ground, the way of it, the only way of it. I have a thing to confess about that morning, standing at his grave with the rain finally stopped, and the valley below us steaming in the new sun. I was angry at him. Angry the way you can only be at someone who has done something unbearably good, and then died before you could make them stop, before you could shoulder them aside and say no, you've given enough. Let someone else bleed for a while. He'd carried them 19 years alone, and the one night, the very first night, he let another set of hands under the weight. His heart gave out, as though it had been holding itself together by the act of carrying and could not survive being relieved. As though the carrying was the man, and a man cannot outlive himself. I stood at his grave and I was angry, and the young woman stood beside me, and she watched me be angry, and she understood it better than I did. You think he should have lived to see it, she said, to see her get well, to see us safe. Yes. He didn't need to see it. She looked down at the fresh-turned earth. There was that scar through her eyebrow, that chin she would not let drop. He needed to do it. The seeing was never his. He always said the planter doesn't get the harvest. The planter only gets the planting. She was quiet a moment. I used to hate when he said that. I called it an excuse, a way to keep us hidden forever and never have to risk the harvest. But last night he planted us in your ground with his last breath, so I think now he meant it. I think he was only ever waiting for the right ground. She looked up at me. Yours, it turns out. A stranger he met in the rain 3 days ago because his mule died at the right time in the right place. A small, fierce, grieving smile, his exactly, inherited or learned I never knew. He would have called that the way of it. He believed the world arranged such things. I never did. But I am standing in your valley and the little one is breathing, so what do I know? I learned her name that morning, finally. I won't write it down here. It was given to me as a gift, and some gifts you don't lay out for strangers, even strangers I've trusted with all the rest. But she told me it meant the first pale light in the sky before the sun comes up, the light that promises a day that hasn't arrived yet, the light you can't be sure of, the light you decide to trust anyway. It suited her, it suits her still. They are still here. That's the part I most want you to have, because Elias never got to know it and someone alive ought to. It has been a long time now. The boys grew up, they're men, with land of their own, a few ridges over, registered under names I helped them choose that draw no eyes. The little one, the seed under the snow, is grown too, and she is not the last of anything. She has children, and they are loud, and they fight over the same things all children fight over, and on certain evenings they sit on the North Hill near the cottonwood and the old grave, and the young woman, not young now, none of us teaches them words. The words, his mother's tongue. There are more people speaking it on my North Hill on a summer evening than have spoken it together in 50 years, and every one of them learned it from her, and she learned it from him, by firelight, in a hidden valley, in the long, patient dark of the carrying. Elias was wrong about one thing, and I'd give a great deal to be able to tell him so to his face. He believed that coming down off the mountain would be the end of them, that the world below could only take and break and erase, that the only safety was the cage of the hidden valley, free and dwindling. He spent 19 years and his whole heart on that belief. And he was wrong. The coming down was not the end. The coming down was the beginning. Hidden and free they were dying down here. Sheltered by a rancher and his small, fierce wife in a cellar in a North Hill, watched over and lied for and loved, they lived. The thing he most feared turned out to be the thing that saved them. He could not see it because he was inside it, the way you cannot see your own face, the way the planter cannot see the harvest. It took a stranger met in the rain to carry his people the last half-mile he could not carry them himself. Out of the beautiful cage he'd built out of his own life, into the dangerous, ordinary, surviving world. I think about that more than is probably good for me, about how the men who save us are so often saving us from the wrong thing, or saving us into a trap they built out of love, and how it takes some clumsy outsider with no wisdom and only a haunted heart to come along and finish it the right way without ever quite understanding what they did. I was not wise. I want that on the record. I was a grieving man who could not say no to a burning child. That's all. That's the whole of my heroism, if you insist on the word. A dead daughter and a pair of useless hands that finally, 11 years too late, got to be useful for somebody else's child. Maybe that's all anyone's heroism ever is. The right wound in the right man, at the right moment in the rain. I still keep my logbook. I'm an old man now and my hand shakes and the numbers come slower, but I keep it. And I'll tell you what I wrote the morning after we buried him, because it's the truest thing I ever put in that book, and it took me everything I had to write it small enough to fit. Rain stopped, buried E on the North Hill. Child lives. 11 came down, 10 remain. Fence still down by the creek. I read it back the other day and I laughed, the dry kind, because Ruth was right all those years ago. I really would write down my own funeral in the same breath as a broken fence. But I've come to think that's not the failing she teased it for. I think that's the only way a man like me could ever hold a thing this size. You put it down small, between the weather and the fence, and you let the smallness carry the weight, the way a single worn-out mule can carry a man up a mountain for 21 years, the way a single worn-out man can carry 11 lives for 19, the way you take an edge of the impossible thing, and you do not put it down until someone else's hands are under it. That's the way of it. He told me so, on his knees in the mud over a dead mule, the first hour I knew him. She carried more than her share, every one of them. I thought he was talking about the mule. He was telling me how to live. The young woman, the first light woman, the one whose name is a gift, came to me last spring, up on the North Hill, while I was clearing weeds from around the cottonwood and the grave the way I do every spring, the way I'll do until I can't. She stood beside me a while in the way of people who have run out of the need to fill silence. Then she said there was something she'd never told me in all these years, and she didn't fully know why she was telling me now, except that I was getting old, and so was she, and some things you don't want to leave unsaid. She said that the night I walked out of the trees into their valley, the very first moment before a word was spoken, the little one, the seed under the snow, burning with fever in the old woman's skirts, had looked at me, this strange, pale stranger, the first outsider she had ever seen, and had stopped crying. Just stopped, gone quiet and still and watchful. And the old ones had taken it for a sign, and that was the real reason they hadn't run, the real reason they'd let me close, the real reason any of it had happened the way it did.